workplace culture is going to drive the rules of the road and how people behave and how people show up. So to me, it's 100% aligned with the business strategy. You're talking about the what around the strategy, and the culture defines the how.
Can you achieve extraordinary results while making the world a better place? I'm Bruce Temkin, and together we'll explore how. Welcome to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Join me as I speak with visionary leaders and top experts to uncover the secrets of humanity-centric leadership. Ready to rethink leadership? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back. At Humanity at Scale, we explore what it truly takes to lead with impact, not just to drive productivity, but to build workplaces where people feel valued, connected, and able to thrive. Leadership today isn't just about hitting targets. It's about trust, purpose, and creating an environment where people want to stay and grow. But work is changing. Fast, AI, automation, and shifting employee expectations are transforming the way we collaborate, communicate, and lead. So here's the challenge. How do leaders navigate these changes while keeping culture, relationships, and human connection at the center? How do we build workplaces that don't just adapt to the future, but actively shape it in a way that benefits both people and business? To help us unpack this, I'm thrilled to welcome Erica Keswin, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, workplace strategist, and expert in human-centered leadership. Through her Human Workplace Trilogy, Bringing Your Human to Work, Rituals Roadmap, and the Retention Revolution, she's helped some of the world's most iconic brands create cultures that honor relationships, enhance engagement, and drive real business success. Today, we're diving into a conversation that's more relevant than ever: how to build workplaces where people don't just work, but truly belong, even as the world of work evolves around them. Erica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, your work has shaped how we think about leadership, relationships, and workplace culture. How would you summarize your journey in your own words?
So I focus on, like you said, the human-centered leadership. And to me, what that means in one phrase, it's about honoring relationships with the people with whom you work. It could be your boss, your direct reports, your colleagues, your customers. And one of the ways that I like to think about this is in the context of both being human at work, but also leveraging technology. Because, you and I are using technology right now, but we're still hopefully going to have a very human kind of conversation. And so, one of my passions is to work with leaders and companies to find what I call the sweet spot between tech and connect. How do we leverage technology for all of its greatness? But then how do we put it in its place to connect on a deeper level? And that's what human leaders do. They're really intentional because they know, excusing the cheesy pun, but left to our own devices, we're not going to be connecting.
So you've written 3 books about this, and that's your passion. How did you get there? What's initially sparked your interest in the topic, and give the listeners a sense of how you got from there to where you are today?
Yeah, I love that question. So I'm going to take you way back, but I promise I'll make the story, not take our 30 minutes together. So in 1998, I was newly engaged to my now husband, Jeff. And Jeff wanted me to go with him to Bermuda for a conference, but I said I'd love to go, but I can't because I'm saving my vacation days for our honeymoon. But I had just gotten this small device called a BlackBerry, which shows my age. And I said, oh my gosh, I can actually work from anywhere. I can go to Bermuda and work from there. And when I got there, I remember, working during the day on the beach. Again, this is a long time ago. And saying to myself, I can't believe this is my life. This is so cool, using this technology and being with Jeff in Bermuda. Fast forward 10 years, I then had 3 kids and I had 2 devices. I still had my BlackBerry, but I had an iPhone. And I began to see that while I could work from anywhere, in reality, I began working from everywhere. And while the technology was working for me while I was home in Bermuda or on the beach in Bermuda by myself, it didn't work as well, when I'm trying to juggle life, work, three kids, and all the rest. And so that really set me on my journey to to find that sweet spot for myself, but also for others.
Now, at that point, were you did you pursue it in writing, in academics? What
Yeah,
was
so
your sort of thought about where you were going?
I've always worked on the people side of business. So I started my career, I worked for a company called the Hay Group doing human resources consulting. I worked at Russell Reynolds, recruiting heads of HR. So I've always been in the people space, sort of in that intersection of business and psychology. I have an MBA focused on organizational leadership and development. And then at that time, I was still working in recruiting, executive recruiting. I then went on to work as an executive coach. And it was actually a year that I took off a year. We did a family sabbatical and we actually moved to a small mountain town when I met an MIT professor who was studying the interrelationship of people and technology. And sort of, it's a long story, but I went to hear a talk that she gave and I ended up helping her on a book she was writing, and then decided that clearly this technology thing wasn't going away anytime soon, and neither was the workplace. And maybe there was an opportunity for me to continue my research.
Awesome, awesome. So when we talk about workplace culture, leaders oftentimes think of it as abstract or soft. How do you define workplace culture, and why should leaders see it as a strategic priority?
Workplace culture is going to drive the rules of the road and how people behave and how people show up. So to me, it's 100% aligned with the business strategy. You're talking about the what around the strategy, and the culture defines the how. How are you going to actually achieve those goals? And so they are completely intertwined. And especially these days, people have a lot of different options of where they want to work. And when you think about today, 2025, there's in many companies 5 generations of people working under one roof. Gen Z has made it very clear that culture matters. It matters to all ages, but they are loud and proud about it. So if you didn't think about your culture before, you better start thinking about it now.
They're going to talk about it, so if you're not listening, they'll go somewhere else.
100%.
So,
They're driven by that even more than compensation. They want to make a reasonable, salary, but if they don't feel connected to the mission and the purpose and how they're making an impact, which is a big part of culture, and also how if they want to make sure they're learning and developing on the job, 100%, they will not be long for your company.
so that's interesting. You talk about sort of the younger generation of workers, but your research, I don't think, and your passion for this didn't start when you saw them, or did it? In what degree did this younger generation fuel and spark your energy around the topic?
Each generation has brought sort of its own, challenges and interesting perspective to the workplace. So to me, working in human resources, human capital, it's always spanned really all of those industries. And I do a lot of work with leaders and how to become a great human leader. And so a big focus is certainly on the people managers, people managing other people. But the trends and looking at different generations has always been a big interest, but also a big part of my work, because you can't have a great culture and a great business without figuring out how to connect at all levels of the organization.
That's great. So we've been talking about your path a little bit, and what I love that your books are called the Human Workplace Trilogy. I think it's sort of just, I read that, I said, oh man, that's just awesome. Now, you wrote your first book, I think, Bring Your Human to Work in 2018. Can you share some examples of progress since then in making work more human that you've seen?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because when I wrote Bring Your Human to Work, people had many people had no idea what I was talking about. They thought I was actually talking about my dog, Cruiser, who's here somewhere. He's a very human dog, but I'm like, no, I'm actually not talking about bringing my dog to work. I'm talking about creating a culture where people can, you know, bring who they are, to the office. And the progress, that I've seen, one of the big things that created a huge jump in progress was the pandemic. And in the pandemic, many workers went home overnight. We're talking not talking about frontline workers and first responders, those kind, but many office workers went home overnight. And all of a sudden, sort of the curtain had come down. We're all on Zoom and people have their kids are running around and the dogs and the technology's not working. And this whole idea of bringing your human to work, many people didn't have a choice. And what they saw when they were doing surveys and getting feedback was that the team and the organization responded positively. They're like, wow, Bruce is my boss, but he's human and he's stressed because he can't get his, kid onto Zoom and he is kind of like me. And so for leaders who had trouble understanding this concept of being more human at work, when I wrote the book, all of a sudden sort of got this very direct feedback from people saying, we sort of like seeing this side of you, a little bit of vulnerability, showing more empathy. And so that interestingly enough, I couldn't have predicted, led to many changes in a positive.
So interesting. You mentioned vulnerability. Um, Sometimes leaders worry about showing too much vulnerability, right? Like, I don't know if you heard that statement. You're their leader, not their friend.
Yes.
How do leaders strike the right balance between being open and maintaining authority?
Yeah, I mean, again, when I people would say, "Well, what does bring your human to work mean?" I would say this isn't about throwing up every single ounce and aspect of your being. We are still talking about work and a professional environment, and I think that balance is going to be different for everyone. But you know, letting someone know that you don't have every single thing figured out, and that you are human, to me is very different than trying to be someone's friend. And so I do think it's something that we all need to sort of watch out for. That we don't tip too far in the other direction. That we still want to make this a professional environment, and we want to make sure that people feel comfortable, because it is work. But I do think that a little vulnerability can go a long way.
So a little vulnerability, but don't go overboard. Um, Interesting enough, you talked about the pandemic as sort of fueling some of this humanness that people saw. Are you seeing that humanness remain, or post-pandemic, are we falling back to the old days where, there wasn't as much humanness in work?
Yeah, that pendulum continues to swing one way and then the other way and then the other way. Well, the companies that I have been working with and speak to, I don't think are swinging back the other way because I try to keep it front and center and reminding them. And sometimes I talk about, to your question earlier about the generational piece that you really can't fully go back the other way. I do think one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing right now is, even though it's everybody's, least favorite topic is sort of this return to office, or where, when, how, why are we going to work? And I get a lot of eye rolls about it, but at the same time, it's still on everyone's mind. And I think those two things tend to go hand in hand, because there's such hot buttons for people, and everybody wants the flexibility, but a lot of people haven't cracked the code on it yet.
Right. And I think maybe one of the ways in which you suggest people work on it leads us into your second book, right? Ritual Roadmaps. Rituals Roadmap. Can you talk about the power of rituals in the workplace and what exactly makes a ritual different from just routine or tradition?
Yeah. So after Bring Your Human to Work came out, I never thought I was going to work on another book. And one night I was out to dinner with a colleague of mine. We would always go to this Italian restaurant on the Upper West Side, New York City, and have a glass of red wine, order dinner, and catch up. And during that dinner, we were chatting about Bring Your Human to Work and reflecting on, how well it was being received. And I had this epiphany that when I thought about all the leaders that I had interviewed for that book, about how they were making a more human workplace, I realized that many of them were actually talking about rituals. And here I was having this ritual dinner on the Upper West Side, and I was like, wow, we always come to the same restaurant. And I decided to dive into the science of rituals and learning about rituals. And so here's what I learned, because many people thought, well, what do you mean rituals at work? I think about rituals in my personal life or religion. People didn't, are rituals at work even a thing? And so a ritual has three component parts. The first is a ritual is something that has a certain amount of meaning or intention for you. The second is that rituals typically have a regular cadence. It could be something you do every day, every week, every month, every quarter. We just had the presidential inauguration, right? Every 4 years, that's a ritual. And the last part, though, was something that I had never really thought about until I started studying rituals, which was a ritual is something that goes beyond a practical purpose. And so I'm sitting here in my home office, and let's say that the lights go out and I have to light a candle. I mean, that's not a ritual. But if I light a candle every Friday at 5 p.m. to signify the end of the work week and the beginning of the weekend, there's meaning in it to me. I do it every Friday at 5. There's a regular cadence, but I'm not lighting that candle for any practical reason. I'm not lighting it because I can't see what I'm doing. So that's what rituals are. So I started asking leaders. I would explain the whole thing, what the rituals were, and still many of them looked at me a little sideways and didn't understand. So I came up with what I call this magic question that literally every time I asked it, the person said, "Oh, these are rituals." So the question is, I said, for example, to Daniel Lubetsky at the time, who was the CEO of Kind Snacks. I said, "All right, Daniel, when do you or people at Kind feel most kind-ish?" Not the most technical of questions, but the way I guess that question was framed, he said, "Oh, I feel most connected to Kind, and I think others do during our onboarding, that we do onboarding with all new people every quarter. And during the onboarding, I share the origin story of Kind and how my father was saved in the Holocaust by a kindness of a stranger. And that's what led to, me calling the company Kind." And in that moment, it gives, the people that work there this feeling of connection to something bigger. And that's what rituals do. They give people a sense of psychological safety. They give them a sense of connection to purpose. And that leads to increased performance, both for them personally, but also for the business. And so all different leaders, I mean, there were leaders that talked about rituals in meetings, rituals in, when they got together to eat together, rituals in learning and development. So it really covered all different aspects of the employee journey. But to your point, it is in this hybrid world, um, even more important to be intentional when we come together. Because one of the things I see often, very loud and clear, is the absence of intentionality is a recipe for resentment. So, if you're listening to this and you have a bunch of your, employees come into the office and only half show up and they can be doing the exact same kind of work they could be doing from home in their sweatpants, they are likely not so happy with you.
Yeah. So interesting. So you described your research to find from leaders things that were rituals that they may not even have thought of as rituals.
Exactly.
How do you take that learning and tell a new leader or a leader you hadn't worked with before? How do you uncover your own rituals? Or better yet, how do you create rituals that will support your goals with your organization?
Yeah. Rituals I find are the most sticky and a great starting point when you look at them through your company values. I'm a big company values person. I think that, again, another sort of cheesy line, but you need to get them off the walls and into the halls or the Zoom rooms or whatever it is now. But they can't just be platitudes on a little plaque. Again, especially with this generation. So if you're looking for a place to start, and let's say it's a smaller company, a newer company, you still can ask people what makes you feel most fill in the blank. But if you are literally starting from scratch, you start with those values and you can say, all right, well, what are some rituals that we can create to bring these values to life? Let's say, we have a senior management team, every week at, on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. What about if during all of those the meeting on Tuesday, somebody shares an example where they saw somebody in the company living one of those values. And so, and the other thing I'll say is when people start a ritual, you also can't force feed it, that if it doesn't stick and it's not working, you need to take your ego out of it and just move on, because they're often very organic and rituals can come from anywhere.
If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss a conversation. We've got plenty more great stories coming your way. So if rituals are organic, right? I'm thinking about a leader who's trying to figure this out, right? I want to create a ritual, but it's very hard to do that without over-engineering something that is just forced. So do you have an example of a leader or some leaders who have created rituals that have changed sort of their workplace?
Yeah. I also say that beginnings and endings are prime rituals real estate. So think about rituals in onboarding, like Daniel Lubetsky, the beginning of a meeting, the beginning of, we all think about New Year's resolutions at the beginning of the year. So a fun example from my book is I interviewed the president of Northwestern University, Morty Shapiro. And Morty had worked at Williams College, East Coast, and many of these East Coast colleges are steeped in rituals. So Morty comes to Northwestern and he says to his team, okay, guys, what are the rituals? And they look at him like, I don't know. I don't think we have any rituals. So he said, all right, well, I know the power of rituals and let's think about it. Let's kind of put a stake in the ground and see what happens. So it turns out that on the Northwestern campus, there's an arch called Weber Arch. So Morty said they had a conversation with the team and they said, well, you know what? How about on the first day of a college freshman's, the beginning of that freshman's 4-year journey, we will march through the arch, and that will sort of mark the beginning of this, what will hopefully be a tremendous experience. So they said, great. So the first year, luckily, not that many people showed up, and because Morty had forgotten to tell the Evanston, Illinois police that they were doing this, so the kids were like weaving in and out of cars. But by the second year, there were about 500 kids walking through the arch, and by the third year, all 2,000 undergrads were literally walking through this arch in a sea of purple. And now I have college age kids, and a bunch of my friends' kids go there, and it is a ritual that is not to be missed. All the parents stay. Everybody finds out, my kid is in group number 22 when the kid's going through, taking the pictures. And the coolest thing that Morty shared with me was that one year at graduation, he was speaking to a student, and he said to the student, so, in your 4 years here at Northwestern, tell me about some of your most memorable things. And the kid said, Dr. Shapiro, I have to tell you, March Through the Arch was one of the most impactful moments I had. It felt so unbelievable to do what generations and generations of people had done before me. And then Morty said I didn't have the heart to tell the poor kid it was the 4th year. And so it just shows sort of the power of ritual, that it gives you this sense of belonging, and it's a ritual when you can't even imagine that what it would be like if it went away.
Probably also helps, at least for the marketing and the stickiness of it, to have a cool name, right? March the Arch.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's another one in the book from the company Allbirds, the felt company, the felt sneaker company, where somebody was, one of the employees wasn't feeling well one day and came to the office and said, you know what, I'm going to get in shape and I'm going to do push-ups, this many push-ups between now and the end of the year. And he started doing them in the office in the afternoon instead of the smoke break or the chocolate break. And he decided to do 40 push-ups a day, which became known as 40 at 4. So every day at 4 o'clock, people either did the push-ups or watched the push-ups or hung out, but it became a thing, became a moment.
Cool. So we talked about bring your human to work as starting where you were going, rituals as maybe an approach to building a culture. Let's go to your latest book, The Retention Revolution. It challenges the way we think about keeping employees. What inspired you to write the book now, and what's the big idea behind it?
Yeah. So similar to the second book, I after the rituals book came out, I was like, I don't think I'm going to write a third book.
Was
And
it red? Was it red wine with friends again? Is that the most Erica-ish you get?
I mean, yes, but I will say, COVID happened and everything we know about work changed overnight. So at this point, my agent is like, okay, what are you going to say about this crazy new world of work? And so yeah, I dove in. And one of the things that I realized, and it's very closely tied into this generational conversation we've been having, is that, back in the day, and I said in the beginning, I started my career in recruiting. If I looked at a resume all those years ago and somebody had moved, 6 times in 2 years, that was a big old red flag. Something must be wrong with that person. But today, people move around much more freely, and the stigma of that is dramatically reduced. And so, gone are the days where people are going to stay at an IBM or a General Motors and get a increase and, stay for 50 years and retire with a plaque and a pension. And so it caused me to start to look at this idea of retention, which interestingly, the definition is of retention is to hold on to or possess, which even that word, when you think about a human workplace, doesn't, they don't really go together. And then I began to see for some of these leaders that even if you do everything right or everything perfect, you're a great, great leader, you're still going to have people that decide to leave. And so this book really tries to shift how we think about retention to think more about connection. And so when we onboard, how do we connect people early and often from day one to our values and to our mission to get people up to speed? And then when they're with us, how do we help them grow and develop sort of up, down, and sideways, even if we have to develop them right out the door, because if we don't, we know they're leaving anyway. But then the really cool part, at least to me, is, the day that somebody comes and, Bruce, you're the best manager of all time, but this person comes and says, Bruce, I'm leaving. It's the leaders that can refrain from the, you're dead to me, don't let the door hit you, and identify ways through offboarding to stay connected. Because we know that there are boomerang employees. We know that employees leave to be brand ambassadors and customers and staying. And so it's really all about this idea of how do we stay connected, because work is, and I believe will continue to be, much more of a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I always thought that when employees leave, I care about the stories they tell about the time that they had working for me and working for organizations, right? That lasts forever. So I hear you on that. In the book, you talk about some surprising ways to keep employees connected. Which of the strategies tend to surprise leaders the most? Or which ones do you actually like the most to recommend?
I think that well, it's interesting. This was a surprise to a lot of people. There's a company called Jellyvision that on an employee's first day, they talk about when that person might leave, and they have a policy called the graceful leave policy or philosophy. I actually wrote about it in 2 of the books. And what they say is they'll say to an employee, it was really hard to find you and recruit you, and you have a unique set of skills, and we are over the moon that you're here. And we also know that if and when you do leave, it will be very hard to replace you. So we have a philosophy here called the graceful leave policy. So if you work with us and let us know, if you're unhappy for any reason or if you want to go somewhere else, we will help you. We will open up our Rolodex, but we want you to partner with us because we know that succession planning is important. And again, it's going to be hard to replace you. So it just was so interesting that you're going to talk about somebody's last day on their first day, which I thought was really interesting. I've also seen companies find very innovative ways to help people stay connected, whether they come in and they're on the company podcast to talk about what role they're going to do next, or they stay on as in mentorship roles in some capacity, especially if someone's retiring, because they're older, and people are living so much longer and working longer. And so to me, it's just about being creative to say, we want to make sure that we have the widest and most innovative ecosystem that we can in and around this company to keep people connected in whatever way works for the company and the employee.
Awesome. Now, the book also explores how workplaces are evolving. So I don't think we can have much of a podcast talking about the future without talking about AI, sort of a given for these things, right? So how do you see AI shifting the way we think about connecting and relationships at work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the days are still early. We all need to understand AI. We all need to play around it with AI and take courses in AI. We need to make sure that we give from an HR perspective. That's a big bonus to help to while you're working, to have your own company support you in learning this important tool that's not going away anytime soon. The flip side, though, is that it's a moment to reinvest and over-index on those human skills, the skills that AI is not going to replace. And so I'm doing a lot of work with companies around, what are those human skills, and let's make sure that our managers, especially those first-time managers, have those human skills. I often say the soft stuff's the hard stuff, and the most important stuff, especially right now.
So when you talk about the human skills that AI can't replace, do you have a list of them, or is it a general feel about them? What are the human skills that you
Yeah.
think leaders
So
will always need?
I focus on, they're the skills around communication and connection and vulnerability and empathy, what we were talking about earlier. If I had to, I sort of bucket them into these three areas when I'm working with leaders. One is having real conversations around how every person's job in the organization is connected to that bigger purpose. And I guess you could have AI or a computer say, Bing, here's your match. Probably won't go over as well versus saying, you know what, to this person, I know you work in the back office and you're not necessarily connected to these customers, but here is how what you do every day impacts our client, impacts our customer, impacts the world. Like whatever that is so important for managers to do. The second is, these great human leaders understand the importance of connecting people to others in the organization. And that's an increasingly complex puzzle slash Rubik's Cube of, okay, when are we coming in? How are we meeting? Where are we meeting? What are the rules of the road? It is analog. Like it is not an AI fix. It's saying, because it's different for every group, it's different for every organization. But if people don't feel connected to other people in the organization, they're going to leave. And then the last piece, there's certainly AI that helps this last piece, but it's great human leaders help connect people to themselves and how they want to learn and grow and develop. And it's a manager saying to you, all right, Bruce, like, what are you interested in? How can I support you as your manager? Maybe you want to move departments. Maybe you have this dream of doing some kind of role and you never thought it was possible here. And then I say, you know what? We can figure out a way to make that happen. So I enjoy learning about AI, and it's really helped me from an efficiency standpoint in certain areas. But I also have seen and I know that it is these human skills that are going to make the difference in terms of attracting the best people and retaining the best people.
Awesome. So now that we're talking about like AI in the future, I want to push you to think about the future. I want to connect you with your future self. So if we think through to 2030, looking ahead 5 years, human workplace will change. What do you think the title of your newest book that you release in 2030 will be about in those times?
Oh my God, 5 years. I don't know. I have a trilogy. I don't know if there'll be another one, or maybe it'll be about my crazy family. If I don't write another business book, you know, what might that book be about? I have to say, I think that whatever that whatever the newest technology is, I I can see myself saying that the human stuff is still the important stuff. And what's interesting is that there are 5 years, 6 years in between Bring Your Human to Work and this book. And in many ways, my retention book, it's very different, but in some ways it's almost Bring Your Human to Work 2.0. Like everything came back full circle. And so we all need to understand AI. We all are going to need to understand that next technology, I mean, which is right around the corner. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but there will be another one. I guess I hope at that point we're not all robots and that these human skills still make a difference. I mean, fingers crossed.
Yeah, we're all hoping for that. So that's awesome. So I want to end with some questions, probably a little easier than that one that I try to ask all my guests. First one is, if you could pick one leadership skill that will be even more important in the future, what would it be?
I would say being an active listener. I think with all this technology, everybody is multitasking and no one really listens and gives people their full attention.
Oh, awesome. Second is, this is where I get a little mystical. I'm going to give you a magic wand, which you can use for just a couple seconds here. And you can wave it and you could change one thing in organizations to make them more human-centric. What would it be?
I would elevate the role of these poor middle managers that are on the front lines. They're getting it from the top, they're getting it from the bottom, they're still doing their day jobs, and they're expected to manage people. That if you're saying you want a better run organization, you've the middle managers really, we need to rebrand them. They're at the center and we need to invest in them. And most places they're not.
Awesome. Last question for leaders inspired by your work. What's one final piece of advice you'd like to leave with them?
It goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is around the sweet spot between tech and connect. What I've learned, with that story I shared about going to Bermuda, and what I've learned since, is that the default use of technology degrades connections. And so don't just default. Pause, be intentional again about leveraging it and learning about it, but also be intentional about putting it in its place.
Great ending statement. Thank you so much, Erica.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great.
I hope you found my conversation with Erica Keswin as thought-provoking as I did. As AI transforms the workplace, her insights remind us that technology should enhance humanity, not replace it. If you enjoyed this discussion, I encourage you to share it with others who are navigating leadership in this fast-changing world. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for more inspiring conversations on what it truly means to lead with impact. Now let's dive into the after show, a segment where I will reflect on the key takeaways from my discussion with Erica and share additional thoughts and insights. Welcome to the after show. Wow, what a conversation with Erica. So many great insights on human-centered leadership, workplace culture, and the power of rituals. Let's break it down into 5 key takeaways. One of the biggest takeaways from our conversation was Erica's idea of finding the sweet spot between tech and connect. It's something we all feel. Technology has completely changed how we work, but it's only effective if we use it the right way. We've all been there. Zoom fatigue, constant notifications, and that feeling of being always on. It's easy for technology to take over and leave us more disconnected than ever. Erica shared her own experience. At first, her BlackBerry gave her freedom, but over time it blurred the boundaries between work and life. That's the challenges leaders face today. The key? Be intentional. Use technology to enhance human connection, not replacing it. The second insight is that rituals build stronger cultures and create belonging. A ritual isn't just a routine. It's something with meaning that strengthens connection. And according to Erica, every good ritual has 3 key elements. It has meaning and intention, a regular cadence, and a purpose beyond practicality. For example, Kind Snacks integrates its mission into onboarding by sharing its origin story, reinforcing purpose from day one. And at Allbirds, employees gather every day at 4 p.m. for 40 at 4 push-ups, not just for fitness, but as a way to build camaraderie. These moments of connection, big, small, become the glue that holds culture together. Another great point that Erica made was about rethinking the word retention. It sounds like you're trying to hold on to employees like possessions, which doesn't fit today's reality. People are going to move on, even in the best workplaces. The real question is, will they leave as disengaged former employees or as lifelong advocates? Jellyvision's graceful lead policy flips the script. They talk openly about career transitions from day one, making departures a natural part of the employee journey. This kind of mindset fosters lasting relationships, alumni networks, and even future boomerang employees. Because at the end of the day, strong relationships matter more than job tenure. And of course, we spoke about AI. AI is transforming work, but one thing's clear: it can't replace the human side of leadership. As Erica pointed out, while AI makes things more efficient, it can't replace empathy, deep listening, and the ability to inspire people. The best leaders will be the ones who focus on helping employees find meaning in their work, build relationships across teams, and grow professionally. Sure, AI can handle tasks, but it's the human touch, thoughtful conversations, real recognition, and genuine care that makes a workplace truly thrive. And then for the final theme, it's something that ran across everything Erica shared: intentionality. Culture doesn't happen by accident. Connection doesn't happen by accident. Leadership isn't about checking boxes. It's about making thoughtful, deliberate choices that foster belonging, engagement, and impact. So here's my challenge to you. Take a step back and think about your own organization. Are you being intentional about how you build connections, reinforce culture, and prepare for the future of work? If not, what's one small step you can take today to change that? And finally, if you want to dive deeper into these ideas, I highly recommend checking out Erica's latest book, The Retention Revolution. She's doing some incredible work in this space, and I know you'll find it valuable. That's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Remember, true leadership isn't only about achieving short-term results. It's about creating a lasting, positive impact on all of the people you touch. Join me next time as we uncover more insights and strategies for humanity-centric leadership. Until then, I'm Bruce Temkin, encouraging you to lead with purpose and empathy and to be the spark that elevates humanity at scale.